I sat in a 6 by 8 concrete cell for 5,475 days. I missed my son's first steps, his first words, his first shave. I took the charge because she was pregnant, and I couldn't let my son be born in prison. I gave up my freedom so she could have hers. But when I finally walked out the gates and went to see the boy I saved, his mother looked at me like I was trash and screamed, "Call the cops! It's that criminal!" My son looked at me with hate in his eyes. He didn't know that the only reason he was standing there was because I took the fall for his mother's sin. The freedom was a physical assault. The sky was too big, a vast, indifferent blue that made my skull ache after 15 years of staring at a gray ceiling painted a shade of institutional despair they probably called calm beige. The air, thick with the exhaust of 1,000 cars and the scent of street vendor hot dogs, was a chaotic symphony compared to the sterile, recycled bleach and sweat odor of the block. I stood outside the gates of Attica Correctional Facility in a set of state-issued clothes that felt like sandpaper against skin that had forgotten the touch of anything but coarse cotton uniforms. My boots were new, stiff, and unforgiving, already raising a blister on my heel. In my pocket, my fingers traced the worn, folded edges of a single photograph, the only possession I had walked in with, and the only one I cared to walk out with. It was my compass, my scripture, my curse. A bus ticket and $200. That was the state's parting gift. A down payment on a life I no longer knew how to live. The bus wheezed and groaned its way south, and I watched the world blur past the grimy window. It was a foreign planet. Everyone was staring into a small, glowing rectangle in their hands, their thumbs flying, their faces illuminated by an intimate private light. They were connected to something I couldn't see, a web of voices and images that had been spun while I was locked away. They wore plastic buds in their ears, lost in private soundtracks. I was a ghost at the feast, a relic from a buried decade, my senses screaming from the overload. In Attica, you learn to listen for the smallest sounds, the slide of a boot on concrete, the subtle shift in the murmur of a room that signaled trouble, the change in a man's breathing that meant violence was about to be born. Out here, the noise was a wall, impenetrable and meaningless. I felt my shoulders hunch, my eyes scanning for threats that weren't there, a posture so ingrained it was part of my skeleton. I was a coiled spring in a world that had forgotten the need for springs. The photograph in my pocket was of Nia. She was 24, her face round with her pregnancy and glowing with a kind of fierce joy I had once mistaken for love. Her hand was resting on her belly, and mine was covering hers. We were standing in the half-finished nursery, a can of pale yellow paint on the floor beside us. We'd argued for an hour over the color. She wanted a calming blue. I wanted a cheerful yellow. I'd won, a small, meaningless victory in a life that would soon be filled with monumental losses. The caption I'd written on the back in the early days, before my handwriting had become the cramped, tight script of a man with limited paper, read, "Malik's first home, our forever." Forever had lasted 2 years. The weekly visits, her face pressed against the thick plexiglass, her voice tinny through the receiver, had become monthly. Then they trickled to nothing. The letters, once filled with promises and updates on the baby, grew shorter, more distant. The first year, they were my lifeline. "Darius, my love," they'd begin. Malik smiled today. A real smile, not just gas. He has your eyes, this serious, thoughtful gaze. I showed him your picture again. I tell him about you every day. I tell him his daddy is a hero. I'd read those words until the paper softened and the ink blurred, sitting on my cot while the cacophony of the block faded into a distant hum. I was a hero. That was the fuel. I would close my eyes and picture her reading my own letters, her face soft in the lamplight, Malik sleeping in the other room, the yellow nursery walls holding him safe. I was a hero, I was a shield. The sacrifice had meaning. Then the tone shifted. The second year, the ink seemed different, hurried. Darius, it's so hard doing this alone. The hours are long. Malik has a cough. The car needs new tires. The problems became the focus. My heroism, a forgotten footnote. The updates on Malik became bullet points, not stories. He's walking now, said Mama. Nothing about my picture. Nothing about his hero daddy. I wrote back long rambling letters full of encouragement, of love, of memories of us, trying to remind her of the why. My letters went unanswered for weeks. When a reply finally came, it was a postcard with a picture of Niagara Falls. The message was 3 sentences long. It didn't mention Malik. It didn't mention love. It said the weather was nice. Then came the third year, and the long silences between letters. An excuse about the post office, about being overwhelmed, about her mother being sick. Finally, the envelope with the divorce papers, delivered by a guard named Henderson who looked at me with a flicker of pity he tried to hide behind a sneer. I signed them in my cell, using the concrete floor as a desk. The stub of a pencil a guard had let me keep. I didn't contest it. What was the point? I had upheld my end of the bargain. I had given her a clean slate. She was just using it, scrubbing me from her life like a stain she was ashamed of. That night I ripped the postcard of Niagara Falls into tiny, tiny pieces and flushed them down the toilet. But I kept the photograph. I couldn't let go of the man I was in that picture. The prison years had a rhythm, a brutal, monotonous pulse. The 5 a.m. Wake-up call, the metallic clang of doors unlocking in sequence, a sound that became my heartbeat, the shuffling walk to the mess hall for lukewarm oatmeal that tasted of cardboard and despair. I learned the currency of the place wasn't money. It was respect, information, and violence, often in that order. I shared a cell for 7 years with an old-timer named Silas, a lifer who'd been inside since the 70s. He was a quiet man with hands like gnarled roots and eyes that had seen everything. He'd killed a man over a gambling debt in 1978 and had watched the world change through grainy television screens and the stories of new fish. He taught me how to survive. "You ain't invisible," he'd rasped one night, his voice a dry rustle in the dark. "So you gotta learn to be forgettable. Don't owe nobody nothing. Don't take nothing you can't pay back twice over. And keep your heart locked up tighter than this cell. Hope is a shank someone else is holding. They'll stick you with it when you least expect it." Silas was the one who taught me to read the landscape of the yard, the subtle shifts in alliances, the tremors of an impending lockdown. He taught me to read the air. "You feel that?" he'd murmur, not even looking up from his dog-eared copy of a history book. "The quiet's too loud today. Something's coming." And it always did. He taught me how to turn my body into a weapon, not through brute strength, but through economy of motion, using an opponent's weight against them. We'd work out in the yard, our sweat evaporating in the thin upstate sun, his instructions a low murmur against the shouts and clanging iron. "It ain't about winning the fight," he'd say as I practiced a grip break. "It's about ending it. Quick. Make them think twice about ever starting another one. Pain is a language everyone understands. Make sure you speak it fluently, but only when you have to." I had to prove that lesson twice. The first time was over a stolen book, a paperback Western I'd gotten from the library cart. A younger inmate, trying to make a name, snatched it from my hands in the day room. I didn't say a word. I just waited. Later, in the shower block, where the steam obscured the cameras, I broke his wrist. It was quick, quiet, and brutal. He never looked at me again. The second was because a man from a rival block didn't like the way I looked at him. It was a lie. He just needed a target. He came at me in the chow line. The fight ended in less than 10 seconds, with him on the floor, gasping, and a tray of mashed potatoes splattered across the wall. Both times ended quickly. Both times left scars on me and on them. After that, I was left alone. I became forgettable. I became a ghost long before I walked out the gates. But I couldn't lock up my heart. Not completely. Silas saw it. That picture, he said one day, nodding toward the photo I kept tucked in a book. That's your weak spot, son. That's the handle on the shank. I didn't listen. Every year, on Malik's birthday, I'd perform a ritual. I'd save a piece of bread from dinner, or trade a book for a small, waxy piece of cake from a guard with a soft spot. I'd sit on my cot after lockdown, the sliver of moonlight from the high window my only candle, and I'd whisper, "Happy birthday, son," to the photograph. I'd imagine him. At 5, he was chasing a soccer ball, his laughter echoing in a park I'd never see. At 10, he was struggling with long division, his brow furrowed in concentration just like mine. At 14, he was awkward and shy, looking at a girl across the classroom, his heart hammering. These phantoms were my company. They were the reason I followed Silas's rules, the reason I stayed alive. I had to get back to the real version. One night Silas found me staring at the photo. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he just said, "Kid better be worth it." He died 2 years before my release, a heart attack in his sleep. The cell felt twice as big and 100 times emptier after they carried him out. The bus deposited me at the Port Authority bus terminal, a roaring cavern of humanity that made the prison yard seem peaceful. The noise was a physical blow, a cacophony of announcements, shouts, and rolling luggage that vibrated through the soles of my new boots. The sheer volume of people, a tidal wave of faces, made my skin crawl. In Attica, you knew everyone in your space. You knew their histories, their triggers, their smell. Out here, I was adrift in a sea of strangers, each one a potential threat, a potential problem. My hand stayed in my pocket, one thumb rubbing the worn photo, the other fisted, ready. I walked for hours, just to feel the pavement under my feet, to reacquaint my body with the simple act of moving in a straight line for more than 30 feet. The city had shed its skin and grown a new one. The corner bodega where we used to buy coffee and lottery tickets was now a sterile-looking juice bar with prices that made my head spin. Our old apartment building in Queens had been torn down, replaced by a glass and steel tower that clawed at the sky, its windows reflecting a cold, empty version of the clouds. There was no trace of us. We were archaeology. I felt a profound sense of erasure, as if the 15 years I'd been gone hadn't been a pause, but a complete deletion. I stood on the corner where our building used to be, trying to remember the exact spot of our third-floor window, the one we'd left open to let in the summer air. There was nothing there, just reflective glass showing me a gaunt, haunted-looking man in clothes that didn't fit. Finding her wasn't hard. In prison, information is currency, and I had learned how to trade, how to listen, how to find the threads that lead to what you need. Out here, it was even easier. A public library, an hour on a computer that felt alien under my fingertips, and her new life unfurled on the screen. The librarian, a woman with kind eyes and a patient smile, had to show me how to use the mouse. My hand, accustomed to gripping iron bars and the hard spine of a book, was clumsy on the smooth plastic. I felt like a Neanderthal trying to operate a starship. My fingers, calloused and thick, kept clicking the wrong thing. The simple act of scrolling was a mystery, but I learned. I typed her name, Nia Johnson, and found nothing. An obituary for her mother, a change of address from 5 years ago. Then I remembered her father's name and searched for him. He was a man who liked to be seen, a small-time real estate developer with big-time ambitions. That led me to an article about his company, which mentioned his daughter, Eleonora Fairmont. The name was a punch to the gut. Eleonora, She'd always hated her given name, said it was too stuffy, too old-fashioned. She was Naya, my Nia. But Nia was gone. In her place was this Eleonora, wife of a real estate tycoon, a philanthropist, a society darling. There were pictures of her at galas, cutting ribbons, smiling her brilliant, practiced smile. The joy in her face was gone, replaced by a polished, expensive satisfaction. She lived in a town in Westchester County I'd never heard of, a place where the trees had more breathing room than the people in my old cell block. The articles praised her charity work, her dedication to families in crisis. The hypocrisy was so thick I could taste it, a bitter acid at the back of my throat. She helped families in crisis by creating one. It took me 2 days to get there, a combination of trains and buses and walking. The train ride out of Grand Central was another assault. The clean, quiet efficiency of the Metro North was a world away from the rattling city bus. I watched the graffiti-scarred brick of the Bronx give way to leafy suburbs, the houses growing larger, the lawns greener. I was crossing a border into another country. The final leg of the journey was a 3-mile walk from the bus stop, up winding roads flanked by stone walls and iron gates. The air smelled of cut grass and money. The houses weren't houses. They were compounds, estates set so far back from the road you could only catch glimpses of slate roofs and Palladian windows through a screen of ancient oaks. Her house, their house, was the grandest of them all. A white Georgian monolith with a fleet of luxury cars gleaming in the circular driveway. It looked like a museum, a monument to the life I had funded with my own. It was a palace built on my prison cell. I didn't go to the door. What would I say? I found a spot in the woods across the street, a small clearing in a thicket of overgrown rhododendrons where I could see the driveway without being seen. I just watched. For 2 days, I watched the comings and goings, the landscapers in their noisy trucks, the pool cleaners with their nets and chemicals, the delivery vans from Amazon, Whole Foods, FedEx. A parade of silent servants keeping the machine running. I ate stale crackers I'd bought at the bus station and drank water from a bottle I refilled at a gas station. I slept in the woods, the damp earth a familiar comfort after years of concrete. I watched a man I assumed was her husband, a tall, silver-haired man with the easy posture of someone who had never wanted for anything, get into a black Mercedes and drive away. He didn't look at his wife as she stood at the door. He just left. I saw Nia come out to get the mail. She wore yoga pants and a designer sweatshirt. She looked thin, her face sharper than I remembered, the glow of her youth replaced by a brittle, maintained elegance. She moved with a quick, nervous energy, her eyes constantly scanning her phone. She didn't look happy. She looked busy. She looked like the CEO of her own life, a life I had no part in. And then I saw him. He came out the front door, bouncing a basketball. He was tall, lanky, with my dark curly hair and Nia's sharp jawline. He wore headphones, his head bobbing to a rhythm I couldn't hear. He was 15. He was my son. My heart seized in my chest, a painful, violent clench that stole my breath. It was a physical blow, more powerful than any fist I'd taken in the yard. I had imagined this moment for 5,175 days. I had pictured a boy, a child, a teenager. But the reality of him, the specific way he moved, the casual grace in his posture, the very fact of his existence in 3 dimensions, was overwhelming. He was real. All the pain, all the years, all the lonely nights had been poured into this single, living, breathing person. And he was a stranger, my phantom son, the one I'd whispered to in the dark, vanished, replaced by this solid, unknowable boy who lived in a palace built on my bones. I had to bite my own hand, the flesh between my thumb and forefinger, to keep from calling out his name. a raw animal sound that clawed its way up my throat. I learned his schedule. School bus at 7:15 a.m. Basketball practice after school on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I found the school, a sprawling campus with athletic fields that looked like carpets of emerald. It was called Northwood Preparatory Academy. The name itself sounded expensive. I just wanted to get closer. I needed to hear his voice. I needed one small piece of him to hold on to prove he was more than just a moving image seen from a distance. I needed a single syllable to prove to myself I hadn't dreamed him into existence. The gymnasium was loud, echoing with the squeak of sneakers on polished wood and the rhythmic thud of basketballs. Parents and students filled the bleachers. I found a seat in the top corner. My rough appearance, the faded prison tattoos on my neck, the scar that cut through my left eyebrow, the ill-fitting clothes, earning me a wide berth. I felt like a wolf that had wandered into a petting zoo. The parents around me wore pastel colors and expensive watches. They spoke in low, confident tones about summer plans in the Hamptons and college applications. I pulled the collar of my shirt up, trying to shrink, to become forgettable again. On the court, Malik was fluid, fast. He moved with an instinctual confidence, weaving through players, sinking a jump shot with a flick of his wrist. I saw my own athleticism in his movements, a ghost of the young man I used to be, the one who played point guard for his high school team. He had a fire in him, a competitive drive that showed in the set of his jaw. When a teammate missed a pass, he clapped his hands in encouragement, not anger. He was a leader. A knot of pride, sharp and painful, tightened in my throat. That was my son. That was my blood. That was the boy I had built in my mind, but better, realer. For a glorious 40 minutes, I was just a father watching his son play basketball. The prison, the lie, the years, it all fell away. There was only the squeak of the shoes and the flight of the ball and the boy in the number 23 jersey who was a part of me. I waited until the game was over. The crowd was thinning, parents congratulating their sons, patting them on the back. I saw Nia arrive. She was wearing a cream-colored coat, her hair perfectly styled. She hadn't been there for the game. She'd shown up for the triumphant conclusion. She hugged Malik, her smile bright and proprietary. She was talking to another mother, laughing, a sound that was both familiar and utterly alien. This was my chance. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic trapped bird. My palms were slick with sweat. I wiped them on my rough trousers and started down the steps. I walked down the bleachers, each step a thunderclap in my ears. I approached them slowly. I didn't want to startle them. I just wanted a word. One word. Malik. My voice was a rusty hinge. I hadn't used it for conversation in years. Not a real conversation. It sounded rougher, deeper than I remembered. He turned, his face open and curious. He looked at me, his eyes, my eyes, taking in my appearance. The worn clothes, the scar, the tension in my body that I couldn't hide. The curiosity curdled into confusion, then suspicion. He took a half step back, his body languished, screaming, "Stranger danger." Nia turned, and her face went through a rapid, horrifying transformation. The pleasant social mask dissolved, replaced by stark, primal terror. I saw a flicker of recognition, a ghost of the girl I knew, and then it was gone, buried under 15 years of careful construction. The terror hardened into something else, cold, calculated fury. Her eyes, the same eyes I had once adored, looked at me as if I were a piece of filth that had crawled out of the sewer and onto her cashmere coat. "Get away from him," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. She grabbed Malik's arm, pulling him behind her as if I were a rabid dog. "Nia, please," I started, holding up my empty hands to show I was no threat. "I just want to talk to him." Talk to him. Her voice rose, cracking with manufactured hysteria. She was performing now, creating a scene for the few remaining parents who were starting to turn and watch. You don't get to talk to him. You don't get to be near him. She took a step back, her eyes wide and wild, a brilliant actress in her greatest role. Someone call the police. Get away from my son, you monster. He's a stalker. The words hit me like stones. Monster. Stalker. The crowd murmured, phones beginning to emerge from pockets. A security guard started moving toward us, his hand resting on his belt. But I wasn't looking at them. I was looking at Malik. He peeked out from behind his mother, his face a mask of fear and disgust. The hatred in his eyes was pure, undiluted. It was the look of a child who has been told a bedtime story about a villain and has just seen that villain come to life. He was looking at the monster from his mother's stories. My mom told me what you did. He spat, his voice dripping with the righteous contempt only a teenager can muster. You're a loser criminal. You ruined her life. He took a breath, his chest puffing out with borrowed indignation. And his next words were the ones that finally broke me. The ones that shattered the last fragile piece of the fantasy I had clung to for 5,475 nights. I wish you died in there. The world went silent. The squeak of sneakers, the murmurs of the crowd, the blood pounding in my ears. It all faded to a dull, distant hum. I looked at this boy, my son, the reason for my entire sacrifice, and saw only the reflection of Naya's poison. 15 years. 15 years of staring at his baby picture, of imagining his laugh, of marking his birthdays on a concrete wall with a piece of contraband chalk. I had constructed a fantasy where one day he would understand. One day he would know that my love for him was so vast, it had cost me my own life. In that moment, in the echoing gymnasium, under the fluorescent lights and the judgmental stares of strangers, I realized my sacrifice hadn't been a noble act. It had been a fool's bargain. I had traded my life not for my son's freedom, but for Nia's comfort. I hadn't saved him. I had merely given her the ammunition to destroy me in his eyes forever. I had given up everything, and in return, I had received the most profound pain a human being can experience, the absolute, unequivocal hatred of my own child. Silas was right. Hope was a shank, and Nia had just twisted it in my gut all the way to the handle. The security guard put a hand on my arm. Sir, you need to come with me. I didn't resist. I let him lead me away, my legs moving on their own. As I walked out of the gym, I could hear Nia's voice, soothing and triumphant, telling Malik it was okay. The monster was gone. The monster was gone. I had become the villain in my own son's story. I spent that night in a motel room that smelled of stale cigarettes and despair. The kind of place where the television is bolted to the dresser and the bedspread has seen 1,000 lonely nights. The wallpaper was peeling in the corner, revealing a history of damp and neglect. I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the lumpy mattress and stared at the cracked plaster on the wall, Malik's words playing on a loop in my head. I wish you died in there. A part of me had died in there. The hopeful part. The part that believed in promises, in loyalty, in the idea that a selfless act would one day be recognized. That part was a corpse, and Malik's words were the final shovelfuls of dirt on its grave. For 15 years, I had held onto a single, unwavering belief. I was protecting my family, but I had no family. Naya had erased me, and in my place, she had drawn the caricature of a monster to frighten her son. She hadn't just moved on. She had desecrated my memory, poisoned my legacy. She had taken my sacrifice and twisted it into a weapon against me. The promise I made to her that night, the promise to protect her, was forged in love. But the love was long dead, and the promise had become a chain, shackling me to a lie that was now destroying the only thing I had left to care about, the truth of who I was to my son. I pulled the faded photograph from my pocket. Naya, pregnant, smiling, a lie captured on film. I remember the night of the accident with a clarity that felt like it was happening all over again. The rain, slick and black on the asphalt, the wipers struggling to keep up, the celebratory dinner for her promotion at a fancy downtown restaurant I couldn't really afford, the 2 bottles of expensive wine. I'd had half a glass. She'd had the rest. I'd told her to let me drive. "Don't be silly, Dee," she'd slurred, laughing, dangling the keys just out of my reach. "I'm fine. I'm better than fine. I'm celebrating." I remembered the weaving, the way the headlights of oncoming cars seemed to smear across the windshield. My hand was tight on the dashboard. "Nia, pull over. Seriously." "Relax," she had said, turning to smile at me, her eyes unfocused. That's when she drifted over the center line. The sound was a sickening metal scream, a percussive blast of force that threw me against the passenger door. The world became a kaleidoscope of shattering glass and twisting steel. When it stopped, the silence was more terrifying than the noise. The smell of deployed airbags, gasoline, and her perfume, a cloying mix that made me want to gag. In the other car, a woman was screaming, a high, thin sound of pure agony. Nia was sobbing, hysterical. Oh God, Darius, my career, the baby, they'll test me. They'll know I was drinking. They'll put me in jail. My life is over." Her words tumbled out, a litany of self-preservation. Not once did she ask about the person in the other car. I looked at her, at her belly, at the life we had been so excited to create. The thought of my son being born in a prison hospital, of his mother being taken from him before he even had a chance to know her, was a physical agony. In that moment of chaos and fear, with the first sirens beginning to wail in the distance, I made a decision, a stupid, noble, life-altering decision. "Nia, listen to me," I said, my voice calm and steady despite the chaos in my head. "Get out of the car. Go stand over there. When the police come, you tell them I was driving. You hear me? You tell them I was driving." She stared at me, her tear-filled eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and dawning, desperate hope. "Darius, no, I can't let you." "Yes," I said, my voice hard. "For the baby, for Malik. You give him the life I can't. You promise me. You promise you'll bring him to see me. You promise he'll know me. He'll know who I am." "I promise," she whispered, the words swallowed by a sob. "I promise, Darius. He'll know." I had kept my promise. She had broken hers in the most brutal way imaginable, and the deal was off. There was something else I remembered from that night, something I had done in the moments after I helped her out of the driver's seat, and before the first sirens grew from a distant wail to a piercing shriek. The car had a newfangled gadget, a dash cam her father had insisted on installing for insurance purposes. In the flickering chaos of the hazard lights, its little red recording light was still blinking. I reached over, my ribs screaming in protest from the impact, and ejected the tiny SD card. I palmed it, a small black square of plastic, a square of truth. Before my sentencing, I had given it to my public defender, a weary but decent man named Arthur Vance. He'd tried to argue for a better deal, but I'd refused to cooperate, refused to give any details that might implicate Naya. I'd put the card in a small envelope. "I need you to do something for me, Arthur," I'd said in the small gray interview room. "Not as my lawyer, but as a man." I explained what I needed. He set it up, a safety deposit box at a bank downtown, registered under a name that couldn't be traced to either of us, the key entrusted to him. "Hold this for me," I said, passing him the key. Don't ask what it is. Just hold it. If I ever ask for it, it means things have gone very, very wrong. Things had gone very, very wrong. The next morning, I took a bus back to the city. The $200 was nearly gone. I found Arthur Vance's name in a phone book at the library. He was still practicing. His office in the same dusty building near the courthouse, a testament to a career spent fighting losing battles for forgotten people. He looked 100 years old. His face was a roadmap of lost cases and legal battles, but his eyes were still sharp behind his thick glasses. He recognized me instantly. "Darius," he said, his voice a gravelly whisper. He stood up from behind a desk piled high with yellowing case files that looked like they hadn't been moved since my conviction. "My God, I heard you were out." "I need the key, Arthur," I said, no preamble. My voice was flat, devoid of the emotion that was churning in my gut. He studied my face, the new lines, the hardness in my eyes, the absence of the terrified young man he'd represented 15 years ago. He didn't ask why. He simply nodded, a gesture of sad understanding. He unlocked a drawer in his cluttered desk and pulled out a small, tarnished brass key attached to a simple paper tag. "I always wondered what was on it," he said, handing it to me. "Whatever it is, be careful. The world is good at crushing people who've already been crushed once." "I'm done being crushed," I said, my fingers closing around the key. It was cold and solid, a tangible link to the truth. The bank was old, with marble floors and high vaulted ceilings. It felt like a cathedral to money, a place of quiet reverence that made my prison-issue boots feel clumsy and loud. After a suspicious clerk and a tedious verification process that involved a signature I could barely replicate from 15 years ago, I was led into the vault. The attendant used his key, then mine, and slid out a long, thin metal box. He left me alone in a small private viewing room. The deposit box was cool to the touch. I opened it. Inside was a single small manila envelope. My hands were shaking as I opened it and tipped the contents into my palm. The SD card. It was so small, so insignificant. A tiny piece of plastic that held 15 years of my life, the weight of my son's hatred, and the key to Nia's destruction. I found out about the charity gala the same way I found out about everything else. The internet. The Fairmont Foundation's annual Beacon of Hope Gala. Nia, Eleonora, was the guest of honor. She was receiving an award for her work with underprivileged families. The irony was a physical sickness in my stomach. The event was at a lavish hotel ballroom in Midtown Manhattan. Tickets were $5,000 a plate. Malik would be there, sitting in the front row, watching his mother be celebrated as a saint. It was the perfect stage, a public pedestal from which she could have a very public fall. Getting in wasn't as hard as I thought it would be. I spent my last $40 on a black polo shirt and black pants from a thrift store. I looked like 100 other anonymous event staff. I walked in through the service entrance with a group of caterers pushing a rack of champagne glasses. I grabbed a tray from a stack, held it in front of me, and walked with purpose, my face a mask of bored indifference. No one gave me a second look. In a place like this, people in my uniform were designed to be invisible, just another part of the machinery that made the glittering world of the rich run smoothly. Silas's lesson, be forgettable. The ballroom was breathtaking, a universe of crystal chandeliers, clinking glasses, and hushed, important-sounding conversations. Men in tuxedos and women in shimmering gowns floated through the room like exotic fish in an aquarium. On a raised dais at the front of the room, a large screen was set up for a video presentation honoring Nia. I moved along the edges of the room, a shadow in the periphery, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. I saw them at a table near the front. Table 1. Nia, in a stunning silver dress that shimmered under the lights, looked radiant, regal, a queen in her court. Her husband sat beside her, looking proud, proprietary. And next to him was Malik. He was wearing a suit that was a little too big for his teenage frame, looking bored and uncomfortable. But his eyes kept flicking to his mother with a clear, undisguised adoration. That look, that pride in his eyes for the woman who had lied to him his entire life, was a new kind of torture. He was proud of a lie I had enabled. Tonight, I would cure him of that pride. I found the AV booth at the back of the room. It was a small, dark space, manned by a single young technician who was scrolling through his phone, bathed in its blue light. He looked no older than Malik. I moved silently, a skill honed by years of navigating crowded cell blocks without drawing attention. "Excuse me," I said. He jumped, startled. "Whoa, man. You can't be in here. Staff area is back there." I held up the SD card between my thumb and forefinger. "I need you to play this." "What? No way. I've got the presentation for Mrs. Fairmont queued up. I'm not playing some random." I didn't threaten him. I didn't raise my voice. I just looked at him, and I let him see everything. I let him see the 6x8 cell, the gray ceiling, the lonely nights, the hatred in my son's eyes. I let him see the 15 years of loss and rage and sorrow. He saw a man who had nothing left to lose, and that is a terrifying thing to behold. "My son is out there," I said, my voice quiet, but carrying the weight of a collapsing mountain. "He's at table 1. He believes a lie that has ruined my life. Tonight, he needs to see the truth. Please." The word felt foreign in my mouth, but I said it. I was begging this kid for my life back. Something in my voice, in my desperate stillness, got through to him. His bravado crumbled. He looked from me to the card, then back to my face. He swallowed hard and nodded, his hand trembling slightly as he took the card and slid it into a slot on his console. Okay, man." He typed a few commands, his face pale. "When?" he whispered. After the introduction, when her video was supposed to play. I slipped back out of the booth and found a place to stand in the shadows along the back wall, my heart a cold, heavy metronome counting down the final seconds of Naya's perfect life. A man in a tuxedo, the chairman of the foundation, was on stage, lavishing praise on Nia, a woman of unparalleled grace and compassion who overcame personal tragedy to become a pillar of our community, a true survivor, a dedicated mother, and an inspiration to us all. Please join me in honoring a true beacon of hope, Eleanora Fairmont. The room erupted in applause. Nia stood beaming, a portrait of humble grace. She approached the stage, blowing a kiss to Malik, who was clapping harder than anyone. The lights dimmed. The large screen flickered to life. But it wasn't the slick, professionally produced tribute video the audience was expecting. There were no soft-focus interviews or swelling orchestral music. It was grainy, shaky, and dark. The sound was distorted, laced with static. It was the view from a dashboard, rain streaking across the windshield. The audience murmured in confusion. I saw Naya, on stage, frown slightly, glancing toward the AV booth. Then came the voice. Naya's voice, but not the smooth, cultured one they knew. This one was slurred, giddy. "Don't be silly, D. I'm fine. I'm better than fine." On the stage, Nia froze. The color drained from her face. Her perfect smile became a ghastly rictus of horror. She knew this recording. She knew what was coming. Her eyes darted around the room, wide with panic, searching for an escape that didn't exist. The video continued. The weaving of the car. My own voice, tight with fear. "Nia, pull over." Her laughing reply. "Relax." Then the sudden, terrifying turn. the screech of tires that made people in the audience gasp, and the explosive, sickening crunch of metal on metal. The screen went black for a second, then flickered back on, showing a spiderweb of shattered glass. The audio was the worst part. The sound of the other driver's screams, a sound I hadn't let myself remember for 15 years. And then Nia's voice, raw and panicked, stripped of all its polish and poise, the voice of a terrified, guilty girl. Oh God, Darius, the baby. They'll test me. They'll know I was drinking. They'll take the baby away. My life is over. A collective gasp went through the ballroom. It was a sound of 1,000 illusions shattering at once. I saw her husband's face. The proud smile had vanished, replaced by a mask of cold, reptilian fury. He stared at his wife on the stage as if she were a stranger, a venomous snake he had just discovered in his bed. Then my voice, calm in the chaos. Tell them I was driving. You hear me? You tell them I was driving. And her whispered desperate promise. I promise. The video ended. The screen went black. The silence in the ballroom was absolute, profound. It was the silence of a tomb. Every eye was on Nia, who stood on the stage as if she'd been turned to stone, her face a mask of utter ruin, the silver dress now looking like a shroud. I stepped out of the shadows. My footsteps echoed in the vast silent room as I walked down the center aisle toward the stage. No one tried to stop me. All eyes were on this ghost who had just appeared, this rough, scarred man in cheap clothes who had just dynamited their perfectly ordered world. I stopped at the foot of the stage and looked up at her. She stared back, her eyes wide with the terror of a cornered animal. I didn't shout. I didn't scream. My voice was quiet, but in the dead silence, it carried to every corner of the room, heavy with the weight of 5,175 days. I gave you 15 years of my life, I said calmly. I gave you your freedom. I gave you a son. You promised he would know me. You promised. I looked from her to Malik. His face was a canvas of shock, confusion, and dawning unbearable agony. The adoration was gone, replaced by the horrified understanding that his mother, his saint, was a liar, and the monster from her stories was the man who had saved her. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw not hatred, but a question, a terrible, soul-shattering question. I turned my gaze back to the woman on the stage, the stranger who had once been my wife. You broke your promise. My voice was still quiet, but the finality in it was absolute. Now I'm taking my name back. Chaos finally broke its leash. Shouts, security guards rushing forward, people scrambling to their feet, their hushed whispers turning into a roar. Naya's husband was on his feet, his face contorted in a mask of rage, pointing a finger not at me, but at her. But I didn't see any of it. I only had eyes for Malik. He looked from the black screen to his mother's horrified face, to me. The hatred that had been in his eyes in the gymnasium was gone, replaced by something far more devastating. The shattering realization that his entire life, his entire identity, was built on a foundation of lies. He didn't run to his mother. He didn't run to his stepfather. He just stumbled backward, away from the table, knocking his chair over. He looked lost, a boy drowning in a truth he couldn't comprehend. Then he turned and ran, blindly, out of the ballroom. I let him go. My work was done. The police arrived. I didn't resist when they took me aside for questioning, in a quiet side room, away from the pandemonium. I sat with a detective, a tired-looking man named Costello. I told him everything, my voice flat and emotionless, the story I had held inside for a decade and a half pouring out of me like sand. I handed over the SD card as evidence. It was over. The lie was dead. as they led a sobbing, incoherent Nia out of the hotel, her silver dress looking like a shroud. I felt nothing, not triumph, not revenge, just a vast hollow emptiness. The weight of the last 15 years was gone, but its absence left a void that ached more than the burden itself. I was released a few hours later, after my story was corroborated by Arthur Vance, whom Costello called in the middle of the night. I had nowhere to go. I walked the streets of Manhattan until dawn, the city lights blurring through my tired eyes. The next day I found a room in a shelter in the Bowery. It was a cot in a room with 50 other men, the air thick with the smell of unwashed bodies and disinfectant. It was louder than my cell, but lonelier. I waited. I didn't know what I was waiting for, but I knew the next move wasn't mine to make. The news was everywhere. "Socialites shocking past revealed," the headline screamed. They called me the wronged man, the forgotten father. They were new names, but they felt as ill-fitting as the old one. Criminal. For 2 days, I ate soup kitchen meals and stared at the ceiling, wondering if I had done the right thing. I had unleashed the truth, a brutal, destructive force. I had destroyed Naya, but I had also detonated a bomb in the middle of my son's life. Maybe it would have been better to remain a monster. On the third day, my phone, a cheap burner I'd bought with the last of my money, buzzed with a text from an unknown number. My heart stopped. "Can we talk? Park bench, north side of Washington Square. 4 p.m. My hands were trembling so hard I could barely type a reply. Okay. The park was full of life. Students lounging on the grass, tourists taking pictures of the arch, old men locked in silent, intense chess battles, a musician playing a mournful saxophone tune. It was a world away from the sterile silence of prison and the suffocating opulence of the gala. I sat on the designated bench, feeling as exposed and raw as an open wound. Every person who walked by felt like a judge. He was late. For a heart-stopping 10 minutes, I thought he wouldn't come. I thought he'd decided I wasn't worth it. Then I saw him, walking hesitantly toward me from across the lawn, his hands shoved deep in the pockets of his jeans. He looked smaller without the suit, younger, more vulnerable. He stopped a few feet away, unwilling or unable to get any closer, just looking at me. "Hi," he said. His voice was quiet, hoarse. "Hi, Malik," I replied. The name felt strange and wonderful on my tongue, a word I was finally allowed to say. He sat down on the far end of the bench, leaving a chasm of green-painted wood between us. We sat in silence for a long time, watching the pigeons peck at the pavement, the saxophone player's melody drifting over us. The silence was different from the one in the ballroom. This one was heavy with unspoken questions, not condemnation. They reopened the case, he said finally, not looking at me. He was staring at his own worn sneakers. For perjury and the original vehicular assault. She's out on bail. Her husband, Mr. Fairmont, he's filing for divorce. He kicked us out of the house. We're staying at my grandmother's place in the city. He recited the facts numbly, as if they were about a stranger, a story he'd read online. I nodded, saying nothing. It wasn't my place to comment on the wreckage. I had caused it. "All those years," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Every time I scraped my knee, every time I had a nightmare, every time I was proud of something I did. She told me about you. She said you were a monster, a drunk who almost killed her and me in the crash. She said you abandoned us and never looked back. She made me hate you." "I know," I said softly. He finally turned to look at me, and his eyes, my eyes, were swimming with tears. The anger was gone, replaced by a pain so deep it was terrifying to witness in someone so young. "Why?" he asked, the word a raw plea. I don't get it. Why would you do that? Let her do that to you? To me? I thought for a moment, trying to find the words to explain a decision made by a different man in a different lifetime. Because I loved her, I said, my voice rough with emotion. And because you were in her belly. You weren't real yet. Not to me. You were this idea, this promise of a person. And I couldn't stand the thought of you being born in a cage, your first memory being the sound of a cell door slamming. I thought I was giving you a perfect life, a mother, a home, a chance at everything. I thought that was the most important thing a father could do. Protect his son, no matter the cost. But the cost was you, he said, his voice barely a whisper. She made me hate my own father. She was scared, I said, and was surprised to find I meant it. She made a terrible choice that night, and she spent 15 years trying to outrun it, building a new life, a new name. Turning me into a villain was the only way her story made sense. Was it worth it? He asked, his voice thick with unshed tears. All of it? The prison? Me hating you? I looked at my son. My son. He was here. He was talking to me. The lie was dead, and in its place, something new and fragile and terrifyingly real was beginning to grow. He was asking the hardest question in the world, and he deserved an honest answer. I lost 15 years of your life, Malik. I lost you, I said, my own voice breaking. For 15 years, the only thing I had of you was a picture and a fantasy. I came out and found that the fantasy was a lie, and my own son wished I was dead. That was a pain I don't have words for. I took a deep, shuddering breath, the air of the park feeling clean and new in my lungs. But you're here now. You ran from that ballroom, but you came here today. And you know the truth. I looked him straight in the eye. So, yes, to have this moment, right now, it was worth it. He didn't reply. He just sat there, and a single tear traced the path down his cheek. He didn't wipe it away. After another long silence filled only by the distant city sounds, he shifted on the bench. It was a small movement, a slide of a few inches on the painted wood, closing the chasm between us. It wasn't a hug. It wasn't forgiveness. It was just less distance. But it was everything. We just sat there, a father and a son, two strangers bound by blood in a terrible sacrifice, as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the park. And for the first time in 477 days, I felt the faint, fragile stirring of hope.